Katie and possibly David Hodgins are here, or Katie is, but at the conference anyway, who are also part of the research team, and there are others that have been involved in various ways too. So less isn't always worse than more, but it can be. Problem gambling treatment RCT and 3-year follow-up. This was a, well, I'll just stick with this plot, hopefully. So we all know that problem gambling is a significant public health and social issue, and in some parts of the world, service provision is actually pretty meagre, but in other places, including New Zealand, there's a very substantial investment in services, both public health and clinical and counselling. I was perhaps a bit extreme here when I said there's been no formal evaluation of effectiveness in general or with specific groups. There have actually been quite a lot of studies, but to my knowledge, none have actually, well, other than the one I'm about to talk about, have actually met the strict criteria for effectiveness, which actually, according to one definition, is having 2 evaluations in an efficacy trial where people are recruited in various ways and administered treatments under controlled conditions. One of those being conducted independently of the people that first developed the intervention, and then after that, those interventions being tested again by a separate team that wasn't the original developer, or at least you remove the developer from the aspects of the evaluation, in a real-life setting, sort of warts and all, in a real-life setting, and demonstrating effectiveness. So, in that sense, this would be, I think, a fair comment, but there have been quite a lot of studies, many of very poor methodology. Very few have long follow-ups, very few more than 12 months, certainly 2 years. Dropout is often non-random and considerable, and there are challenges in carrying out studies like this, particularly in real-life settings with problem gamblers. The present study was no exception in terms of challenge because it involved people seeking help from a national helpline. So actually engaging those clients and then following them up over a long period when the only contact with them is via telephone nationwide is actually a considerable challenge. Generally there's a relatively weak evidence base for interventions internationally. So the purpose of this was to inform policy and practice leading to better outcomes for problem gamblers and reduction in gambling harms. That was the overall sort of broad objective. The design of this study was an RCT of 3 interventions and usual care embedded in the current operations of the national helpline. The first intervention was a single telephone-delivered motivational interview. The second intervention was the same as the first, namely the motivational interview, but people also received a self-instructional cognitive behavioural focused workbook, which David Hodgins had developed in Canada. And then the third group got the same as that second one, namely the motivational interview plus the workbook, but they also got follow-up telephone booster sessions. And then the fourth group was standard care, which we referred to as counselling and options and post-helpline contact. And that was a manualised version of what was the sort of norm or in terms of treatment as usual. And a team of interviewers were trained to deliver all of the interventions, so we didn't have problems with the potential for interviewer effect or interviewer differences because the same counsellors delivered all of the interventions. What that meant, though, was that we had to put a huge amount of emphasis on training and testing and monitoring the integrity of delivery. Otherwise, you could get leakage across the two conditions. So that was a challenge, and I must say that the counsellors and the staff involved in that did extremely well. Sean Sullivan, who was at the conference too, also was involved in that training and monitoring. And a credit to the counsellors and the organisation that was involved. So this is a large, I think probably the largest clinical trial. I think it's probably, as far as I know, it's the largest trial carried out in the field, because it's often a challenge to recruit large numbers of people. So there were 489 that were seeking help. They were allocated randomly to the 4 groups, and people were not excluded if they had major depression, for example, which about 70% did from memory. But if there were clearly signs of indications of suicide or clearly floridly thought disordered, excluded. These were the measures. 1 week, there were some assessments carried out, part of the baseline study, because it was too much to administer all of the measures in the first session. Also, so it was 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and then we did, so that's when the trial finished at 12 months. Technically it finished then, but then there was a follow-up 2 years later to look at the longer-term impacts. So the primary measures were days gambled, money lost, treatment goal success. There was control, other ones, control over gambling, gambling impacts, problem gambling severity. That's problem gambling, PGSI and LIBET measure. Some psychiatric comorbidity, particularly the affective disorders, tobacco, drug use, and psychological distress, was the Kessler. We also got collateral assessments from people nominated by the clients, family members or people that knew them well, and we got some information from that source, although the numbers were not great, I'd have to say. So here, this is the flow through the study. You can see the follow-up, 3-month follow-up assessments there, 86, ranging between 75 and 86%. Quite good retention for a study of this sort through to 12 months. Lower numbers at the 36-month follow-up. But fortunately, the attrition was not non-random. In other words, it was random, which I found rather surprising, but there you have it, which made the analysis less complicated. Okay, so these are the primary hypotheses: that all groups would show significant reduction in problem gambling, that the motivational interview groups would show, that the motivational interview group, sorry, that should be singular, would show similar improvements to the treatment as usual group, that the 2 more intensive interventions, those that included the workbook and booster sessions, would show greater improvement than the groups that just got the 1 session. We also hypothesised that the group that got the most intensive intervention, which included the workbook and follow-up boosters, would show greater improvement than others at 12 months. So we are hypothesising delayed effects. So these are the findings for the trial per se, the first 12 months. People in all groups sustained statistically and clinically significant improvements on primary outcome measures. It's not just a matter of being statistically significant, one's interested in clinical impact, and they were actually substantial. So substantial improvements in problem gambling severity, self-rated control, impacts on work, social, family and home life, health, psychological distress, depression and quality of life. There was less change with alcohol misuse and smoking, although from memory, somewhat more with other drug use. Hypotheses 1 and 2 were corroborated, but there were no additional improvements with the addition of the workbook or booster sessions, although I will qualify that shortly, as you'll see. So here we are, if you want to have a look at see this visually, give you impact. This was median money lost per day at baseline, 3 months, 6 months and 12 months. So you see a very rapid impact which is sustained. Same thing when you look at median days gambled per month. Substantial improvements and then sustained. Median PGSI score, this is using, this is actually the past 12-month time frame, the past 3 months time frame, a shorter time frame to capture changes over a shorter period of time than the usual 12 months. So, and again, you can see that those differences between groups are not statistically significant, by the way. They quit or improved. Some people chose a reduced gambling or controlled gambling goal. Others chose abstinence. So this is the percentage that had either quit or significantly improved in their judgment. Again, those differences aren't statistically significant between the groups, but all are substantial. There were some subgroup differences, though, that are of interest, that are partially in line with the third, or at least the fourth hypothesis of. So generally, the group that got the most intensive intervention, which is still technically minimal, which was the one session plus the workbook plus the booster follow-up calls, they did better than those that got just the motivational interview on some measures, but not all measures. Now, the subgroups that did better in that intervention than in the others, than in the motivational interviewing, was low belief in achieving the treatment goal, controlled gambling goal. By the way, the people in this group also did better than those in treatment as usual on that measure, or with that in that subgroup. People with more severe gambling problems also did better in this group than they did in the treatment as usual or the motivational interviewing group. People with high psychological distress and people with alcohol misuse issues. So these are people with, one might think, more severe or comorbid problems. So there was some indication there that they did better in that more intensive group. So now let's see what happens at 36 months. Participants in all groups did as well or better than they did at 12 months. The percentage of past 12-month problem gamblers in the motivational interviewing plus workbook plus boosted condition decreased markedly from 12 to 36 months. Again, this is interesting. So the delayed effects that we'd hypothesised at 12 months really didn't show, or maybe partly showed, but they did actually emerge at 3 years in comparison with the other groups. But this wasn't on all outcome measures, but it was on the problem gambling measures, which in some respects one might consider the most important. So anyway, these are the findings at 36 months follow-up. Again, sustained on that one, sustained on that one, and no differences between the groups. Sustained on that one, no differences between the groups statistically. Median PGSI score. You can see continued improvements actually in all groups, or perhaps particularly in the ones that got the motivational interviewing plus the workbook or the booster. A median score of 1 is incredibly low. Indeed, a median score of 1.5 is incredibly low. It's on a 3-month frame. And then if we look at the diagnostic cut point using the 8 plus as the cut, you'll see there that at 36 months, although there's no difference between the 4 groups statistically at 12, at 36 months the group with the most intensive intervention, just under a quarter of them met the diagnostic criteria. And the others, it was just around about a half, or just under a half. So that, I think, is a very interesting finding. Although that percentage of people, by the way, still met the 8 or more, as you saw, the median was much, much lower than at the outset. It was about 18 or 19 at the outset. These were people with serious gambling problems, very serious. Most of them had significant comorbidities. They also, by the way, showed huge improvement in terms of the diagnosis of major depression, at least as good as I've seen from clinical trials and long-term CBT studies. And that was using the 3-month time frame, and again you see the differences. In fact, in that case also the motivation plus group also did a bit better than the other two. So, risk factors at 36 months, having control versus quitting as a goal. This was a risk factor for not overcoming your problems, and experiencing major life events in the previous 12 months. So, actually, Katie's talking after me about an outcome study, which isn't a clinical trial, but it's the treatment as usual group with their sample numbers boosted and then following up longitudinally, which we can perhaps touch on this a bit more. All right, so the future, we've actually I haven't updated this since when I first prepared it earlier in the year, but we've now actually that report's now been published in late December, so that is in the public domain now, the 36-month follow-up. And we're just in the process of working through the pilot of a clinical trial, which will be embedding the most intensive and most beneficial intervention, the motivational interview plus the workbook plus the boosters, embedding that in face-to-face counselling services. So people that come in seeking face-to-face, they will get a face-to-face motivational interview, just like the one over the telephone, and they will then get the workbook, the CBT workbook, and they will also get the follow-up telephone booster sessions. That group will be compared with a group receiving sort of 8 to 12 or whatever, cognitive behavioural interventions, which includes sort of fairly widely used cognitive behavioural methods, but also includes exposure as well, which is another behavioural approach that Malcolm Battersby has done some work with in Australia and some piloting work, and has published one paper on that. We're also seeking to do trials in Australia too, although it's somewhat of a challenge getting funding in that country for gambling research at the moment. Now, the reason why the ministry funded this is because this sort of research is very important in terms of step care models. If most people do just as well with relatively brief intervention, why sort of push them all through lengthy sessions? Most people actually have the wisdom to drop out and usually do okay anyway, but it's better to, one would think one should go with matching the intensity of intervention to need. That way, by the way, you have more resources then to put into those people that need very intensive long-term intervention. And for some people that is long-term, and it's not just in gambling, it's across all areas of health. We over-treat a lot of people, and we under-treat others. In fact, just on Monday I was chairing a group looking at this across the whole broad mental health area in Auckland, and looking at making some changes to free up resources to put them to those groups that are currently missing out, but also provide some care to everybody that wants it. At the moment we can't do that. It's unusual actually in research to have the findings of research translated into practice rapidly. It's actually unusual to have them translated into practice any time. Most of what people do is actually loosely or not at all based on evidence base. Fortunately, just about anything works to some extent. The question is adding some extra value on top of that placebo effect and the various other things that bring about change. So anyway, the ministry has mandated that the motivational interview plus the booster and the workbook, that now is the required intervention for people contacting the helpline. What we will be able to see from this study is how it works relative to what's deemed to be the gold standard intervention in a real life clinical face-to-face setting. It may well be that many people do just as well in both. That would be the hypothesis. But it's likely that there are some people that do much better in one rather than the other, perhaps the more intensive. The other thing was this study was done in a real life setting, so people could also seek other help, whether it be medication for mental health issues, whether it be, well, they could do anything they want. Informal help, specialist professional help, and about a third did. There was no difference in outcome between those that got additional care and those that didn't. Now, that doesn't mean that the extra help or care didn't work, because the clients were not randomly allocated to getting this extra care. They made that decision to do that, and it probably is not unreasonable to think that those people that did that actually needed it. And it may well be that they actually significantly benefited from it, and had they not got that help, they would have done worse than they did. So that's my sort of take on it anyway. I think that's probably likely, and anyway, we don't know. So it's not saying that it's just minimal intervention. It's minimal intervention in the New Zealand context, with these other options and other alternatives there as well that people can partake of if they choose to or manage to get access to them. And it's also I think in a society where there's quite a high level of understanding and knowledge. About a third of people developing a problem in any given 12-month period in New Zealand actually access some form of specialist care, which is very high. Anyway, I think that's it. I'll probably leave it there, and hopefully some time for questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Max. Do we have any questions?
Not all got questions, actually.
No, yes, I know. It's always a bit of a worry, but yes.
So, the results show a lack of treatment-specific effects. That's basically consistent with the addiction literature generally, or the psychotherapy literature generally.
Yep.
But what's a little more disconcerting is that, the magnitude of the improvement is not a lot different from the magnitude of the natural improvement in longitudinal studies. My question is there even a treatment effect here? There wasn't a known treatment group. When I juxtapose the natural recovery we see in longitudinal against what we're seeing there, we usually do see a treatment effect, but it's not clear to me.
In our longitudinal studies, how many of our problem gamblers had scores of a score of 18 or more on the PGSI?
Small percentage.
Very small. Would you have nearly 500?
Sorry?
Would you have nearly 500 of them? If you scaled up to the population, I actually think the people that are fronting up to therapy are a different group to what we capture in our prevalence studies. I don't think. Also, in our prevalence studies, we're not randomly allocating, in incident studies, so we're not randomly allocating either. But even putting that to one side, I think in the studies where we can weight and generalise to the general population, which is Sweden, Victoria, Sweden and New Zealand, Victoria to some extent too, I think it's about 40% or 40 to sort of stay in that 5+ or 8+, depending on what cut-off. And then about 10 to 15% go into the moderate risk, and many clinicians would say, and if it was something other than problem gambling, they probably still got a problem. So it may be, I don't know, third to a half. We got people very, very high scores with high comorbidity in a 3-month period. About 80% of them made substantial changes, which were sustained for 3 years. So I think, I can't, in one sense, I can't give a definitive response, I think, but
Well, your first point resonates with me, because you're right. People who seek out treatment are generally much more severe than untreated problem gamblers in the general population, and they would have more chronicity.
yes.
So, yeah.
And comorbidity, like depression, alcohol, other drugs. I haven't shown all that.
That's right. So if you did control from that level, then, I think you're right. You would see.
On the other hand, these are people who are wanting to change, most of them, too.
Yeah, but that's the So
Yeah.
they are inherently more
Yeah.
chronic.
Well, yes, there are often people who haven't, like many of these people have tried to do it on their own, but some of them, of course, will have been people that tried, they've had treatment before and didn't, work. I think it does look as if the outcomes are better than you just get through so-called natural recovery, whatever that is. We're not really comparing apples to apples, I don't think, and I'm not sure how we can.
One more question.
Max, I'd like to get your thoughts on, since you and Rachel were advising everybody on these designs, and it's extremely exciting to be seeing longitudinal studies. Everyone knows that's
Yeah.
what we've been wanting to do. Fabulous. On the questions of sample attrition, and when you're trying to do population preference, and you were looking at a
Yeah.
specific group here, sample selection. So if you've got very high retention, you might have a lousy sample selection, not generalised. In your case, for example, you said, well, it looked like our attrition rates were kind of comparable across these things,
Yeah.
but it's the unobservables that we worry. You can't just sort of say, well, it's all 60% across all of these. It's the structure of the attrition. We're building in proper corrections for attrition in these
What was amazing is that we didn't actually have differential attrition on the measures that we used. Like we thought there would be, and we thought we'd have to make quite substantial statistical adjustments to in as much as you can correct for it. You never perfectly, but we didn't have to. We did not get differential attrition, which is, it still baffles me, particularly the 36-month follow-up.
But is that just measured by the unconditional percentage that continue? What do you
No,
mean?
these were various, did more Pacific Islanders or Maori drop out than Pākehā, or did more men than women, or more severe people than less severe, or more comorbid, Now, in our longitudinal studies, forget the clinical trial, in the longitudinal study, yes, we did get differential attrition, absolutely. And in Sweden we did too, and in Victoria. So there, we had to, they didn't in Canada, they had the high retention, I think, or maybe very minimal. So there we did have to do statistical.
But there you just do reweighting. The real issue is if you've got attrition on the observables.
We don't know. You don't know. You're right.
Well, no one's looking at that?
We don't know that observable. We don't know.
Well, there are techniques, statistical
Yeah,
techniques
yeah.
to guess
We didn't do that. But on the measures we did know, we didn't get. Yeah, but we didn't. I agree. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that discussion, and I think we'll have to stop it there because we have to start the next
Yeah.
one.